Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano, Associate Professor of History at Campbell University, former merchant mariner, and adjunct professor of maritime industry policy at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And welcome to this gCaptain Weekly, our third episode. I am here with the CEO, Captain John Konrad of gCaptain himself. John, how are we doing?
Doing great today, Sal. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's great to be back and everything like that. To those of you tuning in for our first time, if you have not done so yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This way you'll be informed of any new videos that come out. Hit that bell. You'll be informed all the time. And please like the videos too, so that we can get out to even more people. So John, a lot going on in the news this past week. We've seen just a great deal of movement within the container and bulk trade. We've had a tragedy across the board with the loss of an Indonesian submarine. We have seen not too much movement with regards to the Ever Given in the Suez, but I thought we'd start off with the story that you really wanted to talk about, and that's that issue here regarding the container and the bulk trade. So let me go ahead and get over here, share our screen here. So we're seeing two areas of the industry right now that are just absolutely red hot, and that's in the container lines right now. We see them really booming right now. You also have another story in here I was going to mention about charter rates up through the roof for container ships right now. We see groups chartering. Matson just chartered a Chinese vessel to assist in their U.S. to China trade. CMA, same thing, are chartering vessels. And at the same time, the Baltic Dry Index for the bulkers is at a 10-year high. And so we're definitely seeing an uptick here in trade across the board. So I was wondering if you could comment about that a little bit and we could talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you see, it's really being driven by global economic reopening. These companies are reopening at a fast rate, and people are buying. They're using their stimulus checks and so forth. And the entire stock market has just been on fire since basically since the low of March. It's just been straight up. And leading those is, lately is the transports, trains, planes, and automobiles, plus ships.
Great movie, by the way, too. This is a fantastic movie. So
John Candy, yes,
great movie.
Yes. And if you had listened to this podcast 2 weeks ago and taken our buy recommendation, we recommended you follow Jay Mintzmeyer, who's a PhD candidate at Harvard Business School and follows all the shipping. And if you had taken our suggestion a couple of weeks ago, episode 1, you would be doing very well right now.
How are we not on CNBC and all these financial channels? I don't know, John.
You are on CNBC.
So I had been on CNBC. I had been, but everything.
Star.
But how are we? How's this show not on CNBC? But please go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt.
But yep. Then the number one comment I got, and I really did a forum post. The gCam forum is a great place to go and comment on a lot of these stories. I did a forum post saying I was buying this company that we see on our screen right now, Danios, ticker symbol DAC. I did that months ago, and right throughout the entire forum post, it's like, I'm too late. I don't have time to get in here. But what you have to see is you have to look at the, and don't click yet, but we have to look at the macro environment. So in 2008, we really dived, the financial crisis hit hard, and it hit the shipping stocks the hardest. I mean, we started gCaptain in 2006 and 2007. We had made so much money that I quit my job. And then 2008 came and we lost all our advertisers in 2 weeks. And, the shipping companies did a little up and down and then took a dive, and they haven't recovered. And this happens all the time. I get so frustrated with banks because when the shipping market's red hot, meaning freight rates are high because we don't have enough tonnage, the banks go and they lend everyone money to build as many ships as they can. And then they build too much. And then, freight rates go down and the shipping companies sink. And then the banks rate when you can build the ship for cheap, because the shipyards will basically build them for free just to keep their workers working, the price of materials. Banks won't lend any money. So you have these up and down, hugely volatile markets. But we've been in this low for years, since 2008. And, what's really interesting is right now it's the time to build, and some are. I think MSC just came out and with a new build that might push them to be the largest shipping company in the world and eclipse Maersk. But most of the shipping companies aren't, because the 2040 IMO regs say that we have to reduce emissions by a huge percentage, and no one really knows how to do that. So you can't really build a new ship not knowing if it'll meet the regulations that are coming out in 8.5 years.
No, I think you're right, and give that macro there. We've got this chart here, and that shows you that macro. I mean, here's
So
2000.
go back. Too early there. I said to pause, but this is what strikes me is the people saying, as I said, starting I think in November at this hill, and people were like, "Oh wow!" And it went up from I don't know, less than $5 to 15 here. And people at the forum were like, it's too late. It's too late. I can't get in. I can't get in. And now it's shot up to over 50. You know, if you bought in at episode 1, it was about $45. Now it's $55. But now click, people say it's too expensive. It's too expensive. It's too late to jump in the shot. Now click to the long term. If you could click to that other chart.
Oh, it should be up.
Oh yeah, that one right there. You look at this huge, and everyone going, "Wow, the run up is crazy," and I'm too late and I can't jump in. It's this tiny little bubble on the 10-year chart. It's like there's so much more room to go here. So I have been. If you ask me, since the beginning of gCaptain, literally in 2006, when prices were high and shipping rates were skyrocketing here, as they look at this huge run up in the beginning from 2006 to 8, I was bearish. I said, get out. We're in a bubble. We're in a bubble. And I've continued to be. So I've been bearish, this shipping market, from the start of gCaptain in 2006 till last November, when Jay Mitzmeyer really convinced me this is the time to get in. So don't think I'm like this long-term bull saying the shipping market. This is a first for me. I've told everyone and their mother to get out of shipping stocks for the last 15 years, but now fundamentals are changing. So
no, you're right. And you look at when building was done. I mean, if we just look at an example like the ultra large container ships that are built, they're built during this period right here, this period right after the boom, right after the market bust right down. They start building these big, huge, massive vessels. And again, because again, as you said, the time to build is when the market's down, not when it's up, because then you can get into the shipyards, you can get good deals to build these vessels, and then you have the capacity to carry it during this period of time when you make your money. I mean, shipping margins are so small during normal, operating, that you're not going to make a lot of money on it because the margins are too small. But when you make your money when all of a sudden these boom cycles happen, and you see that right now. We saw it with tankers last year, when all of a sudden the tanker market went through the roof. If you had anything that could hold oil, you were going to make some money at the time, and you could store oil on it. Now we're seeing it in bulkers, and we're seeing it in containers right now. And I think
container shipping, I think NMM, Navios Maritime, is Jay Mitzmeyer's favorite. And then it started in the bulkers, and now he thinks it's going to go into tankers next. International Seaways, which is an offshoot from the Overseas Group. And they're run by a wonderful CEO, Lois, who won the Commodore Award at the last CMA, and they're doing some amazing things, really getting mutual funds and such in with this, corporate OSG governance. But things are changing. And he thinks LNG is going to take off. He says seasonally, it might not be the time to get in right now, but it's going to take off. And then these cruise ships, the cruise ships, everyone thought they were dead. They'd be closing their doors last year. And wow, look at how much their stocks have run in the last few months. It's across the shipping industry.
Well, and that's part of that consolidation too. I mean, they have that ability to absorb losses for a long period of time and to capitalize on it. I mean, they're literally too big to fail. And so there they are, ready to roll, and they're primed to go. And if the CDC continues with preventing sailings out of the United States, they'll shift overseas. Instead of flying to Miami to pick up your boat, they'll fly into Nassau to pick up your boat. They already have.
Miami's been the number one cruise destination for decades, and just 2 weeks ago, it got surpassed for the first time ever by Singapore.
Yep.
Because they're moving tonnage.
Yep. And matter of fact, I think it was I saw a report now with vessels coming out. I think the only one who's really hedging right now is Carnival, but again, Carnival is such a big national conglomerate in some ways. They have sub shipping lines that they use and everything. I think MSC right now is going to be the biggest carrier back in operation right now. And you're right. You see them going in, and they're going to start, they're going to start up. I mean, there's no doubt about that. We're going to see them start up. And because of their size, they were able to absorb massive losses. I think somewhere in the range of, for Carnival, $24 billion in losses. But again, they had the assets. They got the assets
it's
to lean
very
against.
cyclical. So they keep billions in the bank waiting for the downturn. They
Yep.
weren't prepared for this downturn. But there was just an amazing article, I think, with the CFO of Carnival, talking about how they were, these big hedge funds were ready to give them money at 15%, and they said, no, we're going to the market and issue bonds and then stocks to first hedge funds and such, but then retail traders, and they got these massive $1 billion loans, I think at like 11% interest, which is incredible for a company with zero
income right now.
Zero revenue, income. I mean, negative. I mean, they are losing money. And then they did these amazing things like be able to, or we thought repatriation costs would be sky high getting everyone back, but they actually got all the companies together, and they
did that huge
ship just with
they did a cross-decking operation.
That
cross-decking operation was really amazing in how they did it. And like I said, in their prime, they got ships in position, ready to roll and everything. They're ready for things to open. If the CDC opens tomorrow, I think they'll be in position to start cruising very early. And plus, they're also selling out against the farther down the road. I mean, they're making deals for, and that's the interesting thing about them, is they're literally booking cruises out in years to come, which I think is a really important thing.
Interesting thing when you create a massive amount of money, and it's the most money we have created like ever in the United States. It's certainly since World War II. When you create a massive amount of money, what you fear is inflation, where inflation goes sky high, and then everything gets more expensive. This wonderful book here, which I think. I got this, which I love, costs like $20, but the price of the book goes, but and then you get to the point where, like, after World War II, you had to bring a wheelbarrow of money of Deutschmarks after World War I to pay for a loaf of bread, right? That's a problem. But here's the other reason shipping is going high. So I had a buddy in Argentina when the Argentinian peso collapsed. I said, that must have been horrible to live there. He said, no, it was wonderful because for his family personally, because they had just got a huge mortgage on a house, and so you have a $500,000 mortgage, and then suddenly the value went down. So the thing that his dad just to buy bread, his dad's employer, who happened to be an overseas company, had to pay him hundreds of thousands of dollars a week. They paid their mortgage off in a couple days. And then when the recovery came, they were in a good position. And that's not going to happen, I don't think, with the US dollar, not that crazy. But as inflation comes in, what do shipping companies have? And particularly the Carnivals, they have massive loans. So if we go into an inflationary environment, if the Fed
they'd love it. They would love inflation right now.
They're going to pay off these ships. And the crazier statistic is the Tradewinds, one of our news competitors, who we love, but you have to pay, it's expensive, just did a market capitalization. How much do you think all of the ships in the world, if you combine their blue book value, are worth?
Well, I know the answer to this, so I'd be hedging, but about $1 trillion.
$1 trillion, which at least until Bitcoin crashed this weekend was Bitcoin was worth more than that. You have, Apple, which is worth $2.4 trillion. So all the ships in the world are worth. You could sell all of your, if you just liquidated all the Apple stock today, and I know it will go down, but you could buy all the ships in the world and still have $1.4 trillion left over. So the massive undervalue of these, and you think these loans are expensive and these ships companies are overvalued like that because they've gone just from $5 to $55 in 2 months. I'm telling you, there's a lot more room depending on these macro plays. And we got to move cargo. What's going to happen is people go out and they're going to travel. They're going to eat. So where's the coin, the soybean oil, the wheat? That's what else I'm personally investing in. Some of these commodity funds, they get copper, and lumber, lumber is big and heavy. How do you move
Yep.
lumber? They've closed all these small lumber mills and they've gone to these massive lumber mills, as our buddy Commander Salamander tweeted this weekend. But with the eye on, hey, because shipping's so cheap, we could just stick them in the container. Well, guess what? You can't now. You can't, because there's a shortage of containers.
No, Ross Kennedy at Man Integrated talks about this on Twitter all the time. And one of the things you're seeing right now, for example, a nation like China, which is trying to diversify their imports. They've gotten into this kind of a brawl with Australia, where they got a lot of imports from ore and other material. Now they're trying to diversify. So you see, the Cape traffic coming out of the Vol bulkers out of South America. Just a great, again, another company I think to watch for is that one is how they're developing. And you really see that moving up quite a bit. And again, I think too, John, like you said, people tend to look, when they think long term, they're thinking maybe 5 years out. But in shipping, you got to look a lot further than that. You got to go before 2008 to see where shipping was at the time. Because really, in 2008 was the first time we saw global shipping take a dip. I mean, literally decrease. I mean, it was not going. Usually they're predicting 2 to 3% increase in shipping every year. That's usually the norm that we see. 2008 we had a dip, and of course 2020 we had a dip at the very beginning, and not a substantial dip, but it was less than what everybody expected. And I think again,
but a lot of tonnage, like Tidewater, which was the largest OSV, offshore supply vessel company in the world, you had these massive pictures of them just sending massive amounts of tonnage overseas on heavy lift ships to these new ships to just get to get scrapped.
Yep.
Because they didn't want to keep them on their books. And I was begging New York City and MARAD, especially some of these U.S. flag vessels, to take them for short sea shipping. And I guess I could go into one of our next stories, but they've been scrapping good ships in the last year.
I beg the Navy. I beg the Navy's been talking about using offshore vessels for a whole variety of different missions, and they could have bought them for nothing on the dollar almost. Because
the
as
Army
you
just
said,
sold off all of their.
it's absolutely insane.
Just let me run those ships. If you want to make money in the stock market, we suggest Matt McCleary's books. Exit Strategy talks about the hedge funds and how finance is different. But if I could beg the Navy to read these books, I really would, because they don't. I mean, just give them to me, give them to you. I don't know. No one calls us for consulting, right? When's the hedge funds going to call you or me, Sal? I mean, they're
standing by, John. Standing by. There's been no phone calls and everything. But
if you were in Westport, Connecticut, working for Ray Dalio, tell Ray to give us a call, because our minds are exploding with the opportunities here that aren't being taken advantage of.
No. I would recommend everyone read The Shipping Man, the very first volume in that series, and just I reread it not too long ago just for fun, and it's a quick read. It's not a lot, and one of the things I love about that series is he makes very complicated shipping very easy for everybody to understand, but at the same time he doesn't dumb it down. He gets you, you got to follow along for a little bit. And you really understand, and he's got all the characters in there, the Greeks, the Norwegians.
Fiction, so it's fun.
It's
not dry, boring.
No. And so there's a little bit of excitement in there for everybody. So there's always that in there. John, let's jump over to our next story, which again kind of morphs into the topic that you were just talking about, some short sea shipping. Always tough thing to say. And this documentary that just came out entitled The Last Line. Got a great story in gCaptain about it.
Well, yeah, this is the story that's going to make me cry. So 2 years ago, I had gone to a conference, and there was Antum Van Kali, CEO of Zulu Associates, and Bob Kunkel, CEO of Harbor Harvest, and Admiral Mark Busby, head of MARAD, and you had Captain Johansson at SUNY Maritime, and you had all these intelligent people saying, how do we rethink short sea shipping? So short sea shipping people have put some of the smartest people in the world. I was talking to Rich DeMolin, who is kind of a mentor of mine, head of Intertanko, ship owner. He said, we had a Harvard Business School grad. He said, we had Harvard Business School looking at this 2 decades ago, putting the smartest people, and we couldn't find the solution, but we thought we cracked it. And the problem is, these shipping containers are too big to go to the last mile. And it's really 70% of all our carbon emissions come from cities, and 70% of that is trucks. And 70% of those trucks aren't the packed trucks. They're these big trucks that only have a couple pallets, what's called less than truckload, which is the largest growing. So everyone's trying to get that shipping container all the way from the factory in China to the final store. But inside, if you open up that shipping container, you don't see products. If you open up the back of a truck, you're going to see pallets, and there are going to be a few pallets, and you'll see all the products that are going to like Staples. But that's, if you open up a shipping container, it's packed from front to back, port to starboard. It's just a wall of concrete, and it's all ball bearings, right?
But the thing you know, and we know, is that when McLean came up with this concept, the idea was you pack this container at, you know, the shipping site, you seal it, you put it on the back of a truck, put it on the back of a railway, put it on the back of a ship, and then you do the reverse, and then you open it at the place. And that's not what's happening now, because what's happening now is those containers are going to consolidation sites. They're being packed into tighter containers, loaded onto a ship. That ship is then being loaded onto from a feeder ship to a larger ship to go through these megaports. And then these megaports are then offloading them into then warehouses where they're being unpacked, to what you said, into these less than truckloads. So the idea of this seamless movement of cargo and containers that was dreamed of in 1956 is not really being done today. Instead, what we're doing is repetitive motions. We're actually adding movement to the cargo, which again increases the emissions, you said. And the worst thing about it, I think, is it blocks out these small little ports and communities in many ways.
And we keep trying to build, you know, the short sea shipping. It's let's build a container, all these small container ports, but it's really an acreage issue, because with even a small port, you got to put the big container crane in, and then you need experts and you really need storage areas. So it's you got to think of it as how many acres are available. It's containers per acre per year. So Bob Kunkel really, you know, is pioneer. He's one of the smartest engineers in the world. He's got a company with offices all over Korea, building some of the most technologically advanced ships in the world he has. And whenever there's a real complicated project, especially here in the United States, Bob always ends up on this. He's one of our greatest marine engineers and designers, and he helped build some of the new LNG ships in the U.S. flagship. He built the first LNG bunker barge. But his passion project has been the short sea shipping, and he's made a lot of money. But in the last couple of years, he said, "Screw it, I'm investing this himself." And you know, I just based off of his speech and all this hearing, I dropped everything and I put 6 figures of my own money into G Ships. Was a palletized solution. We literally have to think outside of the container box, or at least miniaturize it. But Bob put 7, possibly 8 figures into this. And, you know, at one point in the video, in this movie, he's done a movie, because it's really, we got to get the word out there to get people. You talk to the port authorities, you talk to Maritime, they're all talking short sea shipping containers. And Bob's trying to beat the thing, saying, no, it's all small. So he's got Willie Nelson on his board, and with a farm aid, and trying to reopen these small ports, the rivers and highways and sounds, starting in Connecticut. You know, it takes 14 hours to get a truck from Connecticut to the Long Island, the Hamptons, where all these rich people are, because they have to stop and they have to sleep along the way. It's like the STCW. So, and Bob's like, so he's built this hybrid catamaran hybrid electric vessel that just collects from all the farms up and down the Connecticut River, the Houstonic River, and then just brings it over Long Island. Super efficient. But it's not efficient with just, I think he's got 2 vessels now. He's building more. He really has to build out that network. And to do that, he's got to get the idea out there. So I think there's nothing more you could do for the future of the U.S. Merchant Marine, the future reduced carbon emission. I mean, this is the idea, Sal. And now, all he's asking you to do is share his video. Like, please share the video so more people see it. and shop at his organic food stores.
No, the irony here, again, the historian in me comes out is this is how shipping started along the United States. This is how the United States was formed. 13 colonies all facing the sea, with access to the interior through rivers and coastal ways. And again, whenever MARAD, the Maritime Administration, touts their maritime highway system, which I think is great. But the maritime version of I-5 is not going to work if you got to go through the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and then offload in Seattle. It's just not. I mean, because you're going to be waiting in terminals. You're not going to be able to get through them, and instead, what you're going to wind up with is just additional transportation costs for container handling and delays. That's not what people want. They want something quick and efficient. We actually have to kind of degenerate back to the way we used to do cargo. Like you said, palletized cargo.
Back to the basics.
Right.
The world's getting super complex and everyone's confused and say, how do these elections work? And we don't understand and everyone's confused. Well, when you enter a fog zone and in a heavy traffic area, as a ship, what do? You get back to the very basics of navigation.
Yep.
You put more manpower in, you call up every watch and you send them out there and you say, listen for vessels. Get back to the core basics. And that's what we need to do now.
Oh, and again, one of the things that we see
right?
It works, and little, smaller towns, communities can all of a sudden develop into more of a business structure. They can get money from their waterfront, not just from tax base and houses and yachts and marinas, but from actually moving commerce through their area. And again, if we can do this, again, one of the problems you see in this documentary, it's very clear, is they had the same issue before the creation of liners, back in the 1800s, is, you're doing a couple of small ships, you got captains and literally, owners of vessels hustling for cargo like they used to, but if you can start getting that regular scheduled run with small vessels around areas like Long Island Sound, Chesapeake Bay, from Massachusetts up along the Maine coast right there, small regional, don't think interstate highway, think regional, think, local networks and everything. I always go back to the state of Virginia, which had a problem on I-64 going from Richmond down to Newport News. It's a narrow road, you're on a peninsula. It was jammed with trucks and people couldn't move up and down. So what the state of Virginia did was basically incentivize moving basically containers off the highway onto barges and moving it up and down the James River. That's the kind of innovation we need to see. That's the kind of movement that we really need to see. Because again, we have literally reached a technological kind of tipping point here where we're getting too big. I mean, the container ships are too big. And I'm not saying they're too big to succeed. I'm just saying that they're negating the purpose they were created for. They're taking too long in port. It's too long to offload them. And you need so much territory to put these containers down on. There's a story just the other day, CMA sent the largest container ship in the world, on a run from Asia to Europe, 21,000 boxes on board. It's just, the amount of area you need to put down 21,000 boxes is just insane. And you have to create these terminals.
The people who know better. I'm reading Simon Winchester's book, Land, right now.
Yeah.
Do you know we talk about lumber. You think shipping's going up. Look at the price of lumber. It's astronomical. You know who owns the most lumber in the United States? Like forest land?
Probably the U.S. government, I'd imagine.
Well, yes, not including them, but it's the Likes family. I'm reading that. I'm like, the Likes family. So
wow.
I look it up.
Yep.
It's the Likes brothers family. They made all their money in shipping and went to land. And now they're at this huge problem. How do we get the lumber out and to these mills? And it's like, well, your family kind of did that years ago.
Well, that's how Likes Line, again, for everyone who doesn't know, Likes Line was a huge shipping firm in the United States. I mean, just massive, operating in the Caribbean and along the Gulf Coast. And one of their big things was lumber. I mean, that was the thing that really kind of kicked them off was lumber trade. And then they morphed into carrying more stuff. And then again, Likes Lines went away in the 90s, much like many U.S. shipping firms went away.
Yep.
Let's jump over to another story here, and this is again one that's been ongoing. Ever Given, sitting in the Suez. Very interesting story. The UK P&I Club, which is holds the protection and indemnity insurance for Ever Given. She is still sitting in the Great Bitter Lake. It's almost been a month now since this event took place. Ship has been arrested. $916 million charged against Ever Given by the Egyptian government. 316 million for costs for the salvage of the vessel, 300 million for a salvage bonus, and 300 million for disrespecting the canal. which I enjoy the most and everything.
Disrespecting the canal.
I enjoy
You
that.
know, I got a bone to pick with you, Sal, because I'm busier than I've ever been in the last 10 years of gCam with all this going on, COVID and reopening and everything else.
I'm warning you, if you disrespect me right now, John, I'm suing you for $300 million because there's precedent for it. But go ahead.
No, I wasted time this weekend while watching Groundhog Day and Caddyshack. Because there's this guy who gets on every day, gives this update on the Suez Canal, which is much watched TV for me. And he's got these clips that remind me there's some really good movies out there I haven't seen in a while.
I try to be topical. I found for some reason I hit one of those things for one of those videos, and now it just seems like I gotta have a reference for each edition. I do daily. So the last one was Groundhog Day because it just seems to be repeating itself. But you know, this story is getting more and more interesting. Obviously, the case is not going to be heard till early May, so the ship is on hold. 23 of the 25 crew members are still on board. The Egyptians let 2 crew members go home. The ITF the Indian,
for personal family reasons,
right? That's what we know from personal
right?
family reasons.
And then they let a chief mate of another ship that was detained go.
Yeah, the ITF came in, a Syrian that had been held for 4 years on board his vessel in Suez. 4 years he's been held, has finally been allowed to go home. In that story, the BBC did a great expose on that. And it's just, it was horrific, that story. That guy, the ship's getting overrun with cockroaches. Got to swim ashore every 2-3 days
to charge his phone.
Yeah, and get food and water because he has none on the vessel. Man, it's just. And you know, people have been asking me, well, how long can the Egyptians hold them for? I said, well, I said, there's a 4-year example right here. I mean, there's no telling. But I have to ask this because it's really making me wonder about this. Is at what point do the Egyptians just become pirates at this point, that they're holding this vessel for a long period of time? I mean, I used the analogy the other day. It's like, you know, Somali pirates grabbed ships and extorted owners for millions of dollars. You know, the Egyptians have recourse here. Evergreen is not a fly-by-night company. Evergreen vessels come through the canal on a daily basis. You know, they can file their lawsuit. They don't have to hold the ship here to get their money, I think. And so they're in a really strange position here. And I got to imagine the other 8 major container firms out there that control 85% of the world's container traffic, who use the Suez Canal on a daily basis, are sitting there going, what happens when one of our ships run aground or has an issue in the Suez? Are the Egyptians just going to grab them and hold them for hostage, especially these big ultra large container ships that have $1 billion worth of cargo piled up on them? And what does this do to Evergreen's insurance going forward? Because they're looking at liability issues in the billions if they're found negligent in any way on this. So I was interested in your opinion on it.
Yeah, it goes back. We talked to previous episodes about, you know, I was on Al Jazeera TV and they said, what needs to be done? I said, we have to invest in technology and so we can watch these ships and predict it. And we can't build them any bigger. And they said, who's, you know, Egypt's a small country. How are they going to, you know, and I talked about the International Maritime Organization really has to take hold of this and demand better training. I mean, right now we got all this digital training. Why can't I run through the Suez Canal with my crew a month beforehand? And then who's going to pay for this? But it's like the Suez Canal, you know, it's crazy they hold them because at any point they could say to Evergreen, okay, you didn't pay your bill. We're not bringing ships through. Okay, you haven't trained the crew on our simulator remotely. We're not bringing the ships through. And you have, you know, these billions of dollars being, or 20,000 containers being dropped on places like the port in New York and Long Beach. And the taxpayer has to pay. And this is what's ripping up the roads and why our infrastructure is so bad. It's the weight of these containers. And everyone's saying, who's going to pay for this? And they do a $2 trillion infrastructure bill that I got to pay for as a taxpayer. It's like, no, the consumer should pay. For some reason, the MERS and they have this immense political power, but the port authorities, the only entity in the world who realizes the power they have is the Longshoremen's Union on the West Coast, right? They shut down the port and they get what they want, right? And I'm not saying we shut down the ports and we do it, but at what point do we say, no, we're not putting billions of dollars into into our bridges, like the raising of the Bayonne Bridge and the dredging and all that. That this goes into a container tax, and that we require smaller vessels and more domestic vessels. I mean, we just opened up oil exports out of this country, and it would have been very easy to say, hey, they just got to be on the U.S. flag ships or partially. Don't want to get into huge Jones Act debate here because, Colin Graybow is going to call and yell at me. But
all right, he tweets at me all the time. It's all right.
It seems like the big countries are, and the smaller ones like Egypt, the real ones where these consumer things are going through, have the opportunity to really work with the IMO to press the consumer world and the bigger world into funding more shipping problems instead of just putting it on trucks and letting the taxpayer deal with the carbon emissions, the destruction of our bridges.
A box tax or a barrel tax, and I'm not talking about a huge amount, but again, one of the very first laws ever written in this country was a tax on tonnage on vessels carrying American goods that weren't American built or American flagged, and that what they use that money for, we use it for infrastructure, use it to build lighthouses, we use it to develop the ports in the United States. And, if you want to come use our ports and take advantage of this, then you have to pay for it. Why do the citizens of New Jersey, New York have to pay to raise the Bayonne Bridge, for example? Why do the citizens of Los Angeles and Long Beach?
And said, you ships are not coming into it. But then they go, well, if they don't come into New York, they're going to go into Savannah. So we end up, these municipalities fight each other because we have no federal oversight because MARAD's broken. I mean, we're months into the Biden administration, we don't have a permanent MARAD director. And
no, exactly right.
What happens? We fight each other and the taxpayer gets hurt.
Well, because again, ports are controlled by the states, so it's the Georgia Port Authority, it's the Virginia Port Authority, it's North Carolina ports, it's New Jersey, New York, and again, like you said, if you don't come here, you can come here, and we're going to outbid each other. And again, the way we're doing that is by taxing our own citizens to do it. In a lot of cases, like Savannah, which is developed into a massive container terminal, just huge. How much of the cargo coming into Savannah goes to Savannah or even to Georgia for that matter? It doesn't. It goes into the interior of the United States. Yeah, it may go to Atlanta, but it's going to go to Raleigh. It's going to go into Charleston. It's going to go to Columbia. It's going to go all the way in, to St. Louis in some cases, but they're not paying for that.
The biggest expense to these port areas is, they have to pay for the widening of bridges and the tolls and everything else. But I was at a conference, short sea shipping conference in New Jersey. Do you know what the number one expense is by far? By far.
I don't, John. Please educate me.
It's injuries and fatalities from trucks hitting people.
Wow.
And that truck hits someone. Yeah. You have to get dozen police cars, a half dozen fire trucks. You got to close off the road. You got to do it. And this is happening daily. And then you got to fund the hospitals, and then the legal, it goes on our courts. You got to pay the judges and the stenographers for years over these fatalities. And they're happening every day. So these are these untold costs that are.
Well, and we've had this discussion before, and I'll add to it again.
You can't trucks instead of the short sea shipping, which Bob's trying to do.
Right, and you can't just look at ports. You have to look at the whole holistic infrastructure system. That's the thing. You could build a port like Los Angeles, Long Beach into the biggest port in the United States, but if you don't have the rail and roadway service to get the stuff out of it, you're not doing any good. And Savannah will get that same way. Savannah was built because it's right there at the intersection of I-95, I-20. It's got a railhead. It's got airports. It's great. The problem is once it exceeds that capacity, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the I-95
the ports
expansion?
Say, look at all of the local jobs for truck drivers. And they say, this is the amount that we are bringing in the port, its benefit, but they don't add that hospital cost. They don't add the kids in hospitals because of the asthma from the truck emission. They don't add that. So it's really a major deficit. If you talk to people, and I'm not talking just environmentalists, we talk to hedge funds, who gave us these numbers.
Well, and that kind of leads us into our second to last story here today, which is the Biden administration talking about these issues with climate, with emissions, and really kind of, everything from getting back into the Paris Climate Accord, but also for IMO 2050 and all the IMO regulations coming up. And we kind of talked about this earlier off air, but one of the things I think this is an opportunity in the shipping industry for reset in some ways. Technology is one of those key things. If you look throughout the history, and again, I'm the historian here, when you look at opportunities for resets in the maritime industry, that's when nations and corporations and groups and individuals can all of a sudden step up and make a big substantial change. Henry Shrev, with steamboats on the Mississippi and the Ohio River, US long before everybody else was using steam power, but we used it in our inland waterways because it was much more efficient to get
Kaiser,
up.
you were talking about Kaiser in our
Kaiser coming up, Kaiser, again, not a shipbuilder by any means. He builds his bridges and dams, but he brings the knowledge of building bridges and dams to building ships. Hey, I'm not going to build the bridge and the dam on site. I'm going to build them in modules and pieces off site and then rail them in, bring them in, fabricate them together. And the ship's going to be in this, an erector set, an assembly line. Let's build it.
And you would say, I would say he's, if the top 10 individuals, you definitely have Winston Churchill and FDR who are responsible for winning World War II. Kaiser's in that top 10.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, again, because it doesn't do you any good to have the arsenal of democracy if you can't get the arsenal of democracy out of the arsenal of democracy to the battlefield, and everything
and
from.
And then he completely reroute healthcare, so he did stuff even after the show.
Well, he was
like the Elon Musk of the 1940s.
He was dealing with price controls in the United States, so he couldn't get laborers to come to his companies, and so he couldn't raise their wages because wages were locked in. So he comes up with this crazy idea. It's like, hey, I'll provide healthcare insurance for you. And Kaiser Permanente was his shipyards all around the San Francisco Bay Area. There is what he did. Really to this day we live in the shadow of Henry J. Kaiser in many ways. But I think this, I was interested in your view on the Biden administration and what they're doing. We've already talked about infrastructure bill. We talked about that in our second episode, I believe. But here we're talking about climate and the role of climate going forward in the maritime industry.
Very little. John Kerry, who I briefly met in Bahrain years ago when the Navy was running into a lot of these issues.
Did you go windsurfing with them then?
I did not get to go windsurfing,
okay.
or I did not get to share some fries with Heinz ketchup on with Mr. Kerry, which is very, very brief. But he's talked a little bit about talking to shipping companies. But again, what's government's responsibility and what's private, and there has to be. And the Europeans don't want to hear this. I'm going to get flack and everything else. But we are the biggest, most influential ship owner by far in the world is the U.S. Navy, and the real any impetus to move and do things is Wall Street. It's money. You need money, and these two entities don't talk. And then you need government leadership at MARAD. We've gone months, and there's no real. There are a couple of candidates for maritime administrator, and the Coast Guard has been, wonderful. I mean, here's a military organization that is in charge for over a century of. It's the only federal organization that's judicial, executive, and legislative branch. They can literally write the laws, enforce the laws, and adjudicate the laws. It's the only federal government that has all those three powers with no checks and balances, so they can move faster. You have, the Surgeon General wears, people think, a Navy uniform. No, it's a Merchant Marine uniform from when the Merchant Marine hospitals and all merchant mariners had free health. There used to be this immense amount of attention and leadership in the federal government, and with the Navy's backing for these Merchant Marine issues. And the Navy has, it's merchant, that's not us, that's commercial. And the Coast Guard has tried, but they're getting pulled out of Homeland Security with drug interdictions and Border Patrol and all these other things. And their budget keeps getting shrunk. So, I'd like to scream to Biden, we need a leader. We need a leader. And Busby did a great job of getting the Navy was divorced from commercial shipping for years. Now they're interested again, right? They understand the importance of shipyards, and that's all, or not all, but mostly Admiral Busby's thing. But now the Navy's interested. We need someone who can tie in Wall Street and these, and and get this consensus bill. But I just don't see it. Have you seen anything in Washington?
No, I mean, we haven't had the Secretary of the Navy announced. We haven't had a maritime administrator announced. And again, you know, a lot of talk coming out of the transportation department. Secretary Buttigieg is talking a lot about, you know, Jones Act and infrastructure and ports.
A lot of talk from gCaptain that they got to call Sal Mercogliano to.
Well, but I think, you know, one of the things there is a lot more.
I'm not ready to laugh. As Bob Kunkel cried and I was crying with him. I'm a bit of a crier sometimes. When I sit up late at night and I think about the potential here and how Biden's dropping the ball, I tend to get a little teary-eyed.
There was a great story. U.S. Naval Institute is doing a series, American Sea Power series, and Nick Lambert, who's a historian I know really well, wrote an article for this, and he went back to the history of navies. He said, "What are navies for?" I guess it's not for projecting power ashore. It's not for what we think the navies are for. It's to protect your commerce and your industry, you know, and your money, you know, and that's
nation.
Right. And he said that's what the British did. The British didn't build a Royal Navy to dominate the seas because they wanted to dominate the seas. They did it because they had to control their trade, because they were an island nation and they needed to do that. And when you fail to realize
trade equals wealth.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. And we found out very graphically what happens when trade is disrupted. You have the example of COVID last year and the disruption in trade caused by that when China shut down for a month. And then we saw it for just 6 days in the Suez and the disruptions it causes. And again,
and right now with wheat, and look at wheat and corn prices and soybean prices
and prices are just escalating out of control.
Not invested in ships or technology as ships. There's been no improvement. You know, you have all this inflation, and inflation's natural as the government prints money. But they say, why, if the government's printing all this money, why hasn't inflation been worse? Because you have the deflationary aspects of technology. We all can work remotely. We don't have to go to offices now because of technology. So if you invest in technology, you can you can fight that inflationary aspect, but we don't invest in shipping technology. I mean, the bridge hasn't changed in 20 years.
No, I did a video on the, you know, how a bridge of a vessel is laid out, because, you know, I keep getting these people telling me, well, Ever Given was computer hacked and, you know, and taken over. And it's like, no, you'd be amazed at how unsophisticated some of this is. And you really can't do that in that case, because again, we don't invest in that. We just don't. And again, I think one of the reasons we have it in the United States, and particularly in a lot of other Western nations, is we have basically bifurcated the military from the commercial side of shipping. You know, Navy people don't talk to commercial side don't talk to the Navy side. You know, it's only in a few countries that, you know, 90% of all commercial shipbuilding is done in Japan, Korea, and China. And those 3 countries are vying against each other to run the other ones out of business with each other. And what are they doing? They're consolidating their yards. They've gotten to the point they are too big to fail, so that they have to underbid all the time, so that if a contract goes to a Korean yard, the Japanese better get the next contract for the next mega ships. Same thing with China, which is, you know, again, not a commercial capitalist society. It's a state-run society that doesn't have, you know, it's got a whole different reporting thing.
Right?
Yep. And so, you know, it's very hard, you know, when people sit there and say, you know, well, it costs more to build in the United States or it costs more to build in Europe. It's like, yeah, it does. But the question is it worth that extra money for what you get in return? You know, and if you want to just put everything overseas and overseas shipping companies and overseas building.
Why does it cost more? You know, every other industry, you talk about Intel and Apple starting to build plants back in the United States. Because the technology and the robotics and all that can improve, and the cost, the labor costs in China are skyrocketing as they reach capacity.
Well, the world's flattening.
You need that technology, so there's the ability to reduce shipyard costs now. And people say how it's investing in technology, and I don't mean to your horn, but if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, it really starts with massive amounts of investment by DARPA and so forth in places like MIT and Stanford. Stanford particularly, it's that educational component. And you know, people cry about the cost of Kings Point and how we should close it and use that money for something else, as if anytime anything's been taken out of the federal maritime budget, has not been put somewhere else in the federal. It just goes into ether and it's gone. So I do not understand that argument. But that's where it's got to start.
Yep.
I'd like to see Kings Point budget be doubled and a big innovation center be there, and the funds to fly all the state academy cadets to get in there and meet together. Because you said
Yep.
it's siloed. It's not just the Navy and the commercial, but in the commercial, the tankers don't
Yep.
talk to the
Yeah, you're
cruise ships.
exactly right.
They don't talk to the Brits, and they don't talk to the Indians. And I thought it would be cool to do almost like a mentorship, like for your resume, like where you spend a month as captain in each of these industries, and then after that you go and get like an executive C-level job somewhere. Like that's what we need.
Well,
We
again,
need
if you look at the big company, I mean, look at what Maris, look at MSC, look what CMA, look at all these big companies do. They do. I mean, they bring in diverse groups of people, and when I say diverse, I don't mean just in ethnicity and race. I'm talking about in backgrounds, in ideas. Yeah, you get the seasoned ship captains and chief engineers. You get the family members who have been in shipping for their whole lives and got degrees in maritime transportation and logistics and everything like that. But like you said, you bring in innovators from technology side, people who think non-shipping, the Henry J. Kaisers, who don't think like a shipping person and sit there and say, why don't we do this? Well, we've never done it that way. Well, maybe we should. Let's give it a try and see what happens. And like you said, with the investing, let's invest differently in business. We don't have the maritime Shark Tank. I'm going to keep hopping on that all the time. We should have those maritime Shark Tanks where we can sit there and get investors pooled together for investing in an idea. And again, the problem is
we have a few. I'm on the board of directors of See Ahead, which I love, and I'm a mentor at Mass Challenge.
Right.
And there's Port Excel, which does a great job. But those companies are struggling too. They have to get investors from the bigger guys.
Yep. And again, I think it's part of the sea blindness. We don't see it. You don't see how this is. That's why a story like Ever Given all of a sudden generates attention, because wait a minute, there's a ship stuck in the Suez and now my goods are going to cost more, or I'm not going to be able to get this. I don't understand how that happens, because again, we're just used to it. We're just used to everything showing up on time as we need it. I want to click my Amazon button and have that drone deliver my package to my house, which is not going to happen, anytime soon, but we think it's going to happen. But that's what we want to see happen across the board.
Education's that component, and not try to toot my own horn here, but it's well deserved. I was just reading Dead Wake about the Lusitania, the book, Eric Larson. He talks about this building in the Battery. There's a building in the Battery that the city provided, and it was filled with dock reporters, ship reporters. That's all they did.
Yep.
It was filled with reporters that all they did is talk about maritime, because they understood the importance of teaching the public about maritime ships. And in the 90s, there's one, Carl Nolte of the San Francisco Chronicle. I talked to him last week. He's the last known dock reporter. He's getting up there in ages, but everyone else retired when they retired all these specialists and hired generalists and everything else. And that expertise was lost. And when I started gCaptain, there were places like Tradewinds where you could pay $1,200 a year for news, but you could not get maritime news for free anywhere. And so there was no sharing of the information. Now everyone says, oh, there's Splash 247 and all this, but not when I started gCaptain. Like, it's important that we share the same stories, and we share the news, and we share that information.
Well, and also you contextualize it. I think that's the other big element too.
Building in New York City, the city provided a building for journalists. Like, can they give gCam a little office? I don't know.
Well, and Lusitania is always a great story too, because one of the things you have there is back in the newspapers, they would have the shipping lines, and so you would have, people would follow those like they follow stats in sports or something like that,
And the captains would talk to these guys. Now when I call Academy, he's like, I'll tell you everything is you promise not to put my name in, because I'm not allowed.
Oh, well, they were the rock stars. I mean, they really were, captains of the big cruise liners, they were the rock stars and everything. And today, again, you have just this aversion to talk about anything. Again, I had to write a story about Ever Given. I hate to go back to it again, but I can go back to one more time. I had to write the story about Ever Given. And one of the stories I wanted to talk about was the Maersk Denver, the vessel right behind her that had a crash stop. I mean, literally had to stop within a mile to prevent.
Job.
Fantastic job. I mean, that should be a story that we should all be proud of. An American flag vessel. I contacted Maersk Lines, not a word, not a peep, not even like, hey, no comment, just didn't even answer me back, and it's just like, all right, well, it's like, let's talk about a positive story. Let's talk about, something good to talk about. And, a lot of these other maritime groups have also came out there, Splash 247 and Lloyd's.
It doesn't talk about the environmental destruction of all the oil spill. It does briefly, but we don't go into that, the policy and Obama versus, It talks about the rescue, the people who
Yep.
are immediately killed in the explosion were lost, and everyone else, including people. There was one guy with his brain exposed, an engineer, King's Point, brain exposed, that they rescued everyone off of the vessel. That's the story I wanted to tell. But now
Yep.
Transocean, don't talk to him. He wrote a book against us, and there was a movie. There are these wonderful stories that are, they're obviously negative aspects, but there are positive aspects. And again, with the Ever Given, the salvage is a wonderful story.
Yep. And the story needs to be told. But again, sometimes I also argue this, that sometimes we get into the minutia of the story. We get into details of a story, but we don't have the big context of the story. And that's what maritime reporters did a lot too. They didn't just report on, okay, here's this horrific event. Here's the story. Here's the events. It saves it. But now we have to contextualize it, and
people.
Right. And talk about, okay, this is how this ship fits into the overall concept of offshore drilling, for example, or how the El Faro fits in, Rachel Slade's book, how the El Faro fits into, the closed Jones Act trade or cabotage trade. And that's what's really missing a lot here and everything that we don't see. And my dog's squeaking her bowl, so I apologize. But I think we've covered a lot today, John. I don't want to go any further. I think we hit everything we needed to talk about for this week.
These dogs letting us know we're
being squeaked off. So we're being told that we have gone too far. We
gotta get him a hook.
The squeaking ball has been sounded. So I hope you enjoyed our this week's gCaptain Weekly. Again, we ask that you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you hit the bell so that you get alerted of new videos when they come out. Give it a thumbs up. We always like likes. Any comments at all, please contribute. We're always looking for positive and negative comments. Negative comments should be directed to John Konrad at gCaptain. That's where all negative comments should go. Positive comments should come to me. Comment
on the video. Go ahead, we read that, or go to the forum.gcaptain.com, and if you got negative comments about me, let it rip. I like to read those.
I have plenty of negative comments about you, John. I'll get on the forum immediately after this and start listening to them immediately here.
And subscribe to Sal's. Sal, can you put the link in the show notes to your?
Sure. Feel free to come over to my YouTube channel. I'm talking a lot about Ever Given and a few other things. I do a weekly kind of little maritime perspective on some big topic. So feel free to come on over there if you like to. But again, I'm Sal Mercogliano. That's John Konrad. This is gCaptain Weekly. We appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll see you next week.